A struggling artist refuses to sell out, never realizing the buyer was secretly a billionaire patron. This thought haunted Eliza Morgan's mind as she stared at the blank canvas before her, fingers trembling with both cold and determination. The ancient radiator in her studio apartment wheezed pathetically, offering little relief against the November chill that crept through the cracked windows and under the door. Turning her palm over, she counted the remaining bills, 3 20s and 2 5s, all that stood between her and complete destitution. The rent was due in 5 days. Her stomach had been growling for the better part of 2 days, yet she'd chosen tubes of cobalt blue and cadmium yellow over groceries last week, a decision that seemed increasingly foolish as night fell over Brooklyn. Eliza pulled her frayed cardigan tighter and dipped her brush into the cerulean blue. This painting would be different. This one would finally speak the truth she'd been struggling to articulate for years. This one would save her. It had to. With each stroke, the familiar calm descended, momentarily silencing the chorus of doubts that had become her constant companions. She painted through the night, lost in the alchemy of creating something from nothing, transforming raw emotion into visual poetry. Dawn broke reluctantly through the grime-coated windows, casting her studio in a pale, unforgiving light. Eliza stepped back, her body aching from standing all night, and studied her work. It wasn't perfect. It never was. But something in the chaotic symphony of colors and shapes satisfied a hunger deeper than the one in her stomach. Her phone buzzed, shattering the moment. The screen displayed her sister Catherine's name, along with 3 missed calls from yesterday. "Eliza, please tell me you've reconsidered Paul's offer," Catherine said without preamble, her voice tight with concern. Paul Harriman, creative director at Nexus Advertising, had offered Eliza a job designing sleek corporate logos and sanitized website graphics. The salary would solve all her financial problems instantly. It would also suffocate everything that made her art worth creating. "I haven't," Eliza replied, knowing what would follow. "You're being ridiculous. You're 32 years old, living like a college student, and for what? Some abstract principle about artistic integrity? Real artists have patrons, Eliza. They have people who pay them." Eliza pressed her eyes closed. Real artists don't compromise their vision to sell car insurance and fast food. The silence on the other end was brief but loaded. "Mom's worried about you." "We all are." "I'm fine," Eliza lied, looking around at her cluttered one-room apartment where she both lived and worked. Canvases leaned against every available surface, some brilliant, others abandoned. "I just sold 2 pieces last month." What she didn't say, those sales barely covered utilities. After ending the call with her customary promise to think about it, Eliza washed her brushes methodically, the routine bringing small comfort. The gallery showing next week was her last real hope. Marcel, her friend who owned the small independent gallery in Williamsburg, had taken a chance on her, giving her the main wall for the evening. Now she just needed someone to actually buy something. The gallery opening arrived with the season's first real snowfall. Fat, wet flakes swirled through the yellow circles of streetlights as Eliza approached the gallery, carrying her final piece wrapped carefully in an old sheet. She'd spent her last dollars on a second-hand black dress and a trip to the laundromat, determined to at least look like she belonged among the well-heeled art enthusiasts who occasionally frequented Marcel's space. "There she is!" Marcel's voice boomed across the nearly empty gallery. His outsized personality never failed to make her smile, despite the knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. "The woman of the hour!" Marcel, with his impeccably groomed salt-and-pepper beard and vintage glasses, had been championing her work for 3 years, despite limited commercial success. He kissed her on both cheeks, then stepped back to examine her. "You look tired, my dear." "Just focused," she countered, unwrapping her painting and revealing the culmination of her latest series, a massive canvas dominated by fractured shapes that somehow cohered into a landscape of emotional wreckage and tentative hope. Marcel's eyes widened. "This is different. Better. There's something here that wasn't before." He helped her hang it as the first guests began to arrive, a trickle rather than the flood she'd hoped for. The snowy night was keeping people away. 2 hours later, Eliza stood in the corner, nursing the same glass of cheap white wine, watching as a handful of people moved between her paintings, occasionally murmuring to each other, but more often glancing at their phones. No little red dots had appeared next to any of her works, the signal that a piece had sold. Her heart sank as she checked the time. Only an hour left, and then she would have to face the reality of her situation. Maybe Catherine was right. Maybe it was time to surrender. The brushwork in this one is particularly intriguing. The voice startled her from her thoughts. A man stood before her largest canvas, head tilted slightly as he studied it. He wore a navy blue peacoat dusted with melting snowflakes and worn leather boots that had tracked water onto the polished floor. Nothing about him suggested wealth or influence. Middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair similar to Marcel's, but cut more conservatively, and a face that was neither handsome nor unmemorable. "Thank you," Eliza replied automatically, expecting him to move on as the others had. Instead, he pointed to a particular area of swirling darkness at the edge of the canvas. "This section here, it feels like it's pulling away from the center but can't quite break free." Was that intentional? The question caught her off guard. Most casual observers commented on the colors or asked what the painting was supposed to be. "Yes," she admitted. "I was working with the tension between desire and fear, the way we sometimes sabotage our own escape." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the canvas. "You've captured it perfectly." He turned to her then, extending his hand. "I'm David Pearson." Eliza Morgan. His handshake was firm but brief. "I know. Your work is remarkable, Mrs. Morgan." Something in his tone made her straighten slightly. "Are you a collector, Mr. Pearson?" A faint smile crossed his face. "Of sorts. I'm interested in this piece, but I have a question first." Her pulse quickened. "A sale, any sale, would be a lifeline right now. Would you be willing to make some adjustments to it? Perhaps brighten the palette, make it more accessible? I represent a corporate client looking for art for their headquarters, but they prefer pieces that are less," he gestured vaguely, "challenging." The familiar weight of disappointment settled in her chest. Of course, another person who wanted her to compromise. "I'm sorry, Mr. Pearson, but the work is complete as it stands," she said, the words practiced and smooth from repetition. "I don't alter my finished pieces to suit buyers' preferences." Instead of the usual frustrated response, David Pearson simply nodded. "I thought you might say that." He glanced around the gallery. "What about the others? All the same stance?" "All the same stance," she confirmed, lifting her chin slightly. "My work isn't furniture to match someone's decor. It either speaks to you as it is, or it doesn't." He studied her face for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Admirable. Impractical perhaps, but admirable." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a business card, offering it to her. "If you change your mind or complete new works that might interest my client, please call me." The card was simple. David Pearson, art consultant, with a phone number. No company name, no email, no website. "Thank you, but I won't be changing my mind," she said, slipping the card into her dress pocket nonetheless. He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I didn't think you would. Good night, Ms. Morgan. I hope we meet again." As he left the gallery, Marcel sidled up beside her. "Who was that?" "Art consultant named Pearson. Wanted me to change my work for a corporate client." Marcel sighed. "And you, of course, refused." "Of course." "Eliza," he hesitated. "You know I believe in your work, but belief doesn't pay bills." She nodded, the familiar guilt washing over her. Marcel had given her this opportunity, despite knowing there was little chance of commission for him. "I know. I'm sorry tonight has been so slow." He squeezed her shoulder. "There's always next time." But they both knew there might not be a next time if something didn't change soon. The eviction notice arrived 3 days later, the impersonal type stark against the white paper. Eliza sat on her mattress on the floor, the notice trembling in her hands as reality crashed through her carefully constructed defenses. 30 days. Then what? Her phone rang, Catherine again. She let it go to voicemail, unable to bear her sister's concern, which would inevitably transform into another lecture about responsibility and growing up. Instead, she did what she always did when the world became too much. She painted. With desperate energy, she attacked a fresh canvas, pouring her fear, anger, and defiance into each stroke. Hours passed unnoticed as she worked, the afternoon light fading into evening shadow. When she finally stepped back, her arms aching and spattered with paint, she was surprised by what she'd created. Unlike her usual abstract work, this painting contained a recognizable figure, a woman standing at the edge of a precipice, her back to the viewer, facing a storm of color and light. The buzzer for her apartment startled her. Few people ever visited, and never unannounced. Wiping her hands on a rag, she approached the intercom. "Yes, Ms. Morgan? It's David Pearson from the gallery opening." Confused, she buzzed him in, quickly glancing around at her chaotic living space with a wince. There was no time to tidy up, so she simply unbolted the door and waited. His footsteps echoed in the stairwell before he appeared, carrying a paper bag that emitted an enticing aroma and a cardboard drink carrier with 2 cups. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, seeming perfectly at ease despite her surprise. "I was in the neighborhood and thought you might be interested in discussing your work further. I brought dinner, assuming you haven't eaten yet." Eliza blinked, temporarily speechless. The presumption should have annoyed her, but the smell of the food made her stomach contract painfully, reminding her she'd been subsisting on ramen and peanut butter for days. "That's unexpected," she managed, opening the door wider. "But yes, come in." He entered, taking in the studio apartment with an appraising glance that didn't seem judgmental. Working space and living space combined. Efficient. Necessary, she corrected, clearing a small table of paint tubes and brushes. "Not many options at my price point." He set down the food, Thai from the smell, and handed her one of the coffee cups. "I took a chance on a chai latte. You struck me as someone who might prefer it to coffee this late." She accepted it, oddly touched by the thoughtful guess, which happened to be correct. "Thank you." "But Mr. Pearson..." "David, please." "David. Why are you here?" "I was clear at the gallery that I won't modify my work." He began unpacking containers of pad thai, green curry, and spring rolls. "You were..." And I respected that answer. Steam rose from the food as he removed the lids. "I'm here because I'm interested in your work as it is. No modifications." Eliza narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "What about your corporate client?" "They'll need to find another artist or learn to appreciate challenging art." He gestured to the food. "Shall we eat while we talk?" Hunger won out over suspicion. They sat at her small table, the incongruity of the situation not lost on her. This neat, professional man in her chaotic apartment, eating takeout surrounded by half-finished canvases and the detritus of her artistic life. "So if not for your client, why the interest in my work?" she asked between bites of the best meal she'd had in weeks. David took his time answering, his gaze drifting to the paintings leaning against the walls. "I've been following your development for about 2 years now." "Following me? How? Why?" "I attend many gallery shows, especially featuring emerging artists. I saw your work at the Compass Gallery in 2018, then again at Marcel's place last year." He spoke matter-of-factly, as if it were perfectly normal to track an unknown artist's career. "Your technique has evolved considerably, but what's remained consistent is your unwillingness to compromise your vision." Eliza set down her fork, appetite momentarily forgotten. "That still doesn't explain why you're here now, with dinner." A faint smile crossed his face. "Consider it an investment in potential. I believe your work has significant value, current market trends notwithstanding." "Market trends being that no one wants to buy it," she said dryly. "Not yet," he corrected. "Art appreciation is often a matter of context and timing." He nodded toward her newest painting, still wet on the easel. "That one's different." She followed his gaze. "It just happened today." "May I?" he asked, rising and approaching the canvas. She nodded, watching as he studied it with the same intensity he'd shown at the gallery. "This is powerful," he said finally. "The figure on the edge, it's you, isn't it?" "It wasn't intentional," she admitted. "But yes, I suppose it is." He turned to face her. "I'd like to buy it." Her heart leapt, then immediately constricted with suspicion. "Why?" "It's not even finished. And it's nothing like what your client wanted." "It's not for my client. It's for me." He named a sum that made her breath catch, enough to cover 2 months' rent and more. The temptation was overwhelming. That money would solve her immediate crisis, give her time to figure out next steps. But something felt off about the situation. "Is this charity, Mr. Pearson?" "Because I don't need..." "It's business," he interrupted firmly. "I buy art that I believe will increase in value. Nothing more, nothing less." She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. But years of struggle had left her wary of anything that seemed too good to be true. "I'll need to finish it properly," she said finally. "Of course. I wouldn't want it any other way." He returned to the table, retrieving a checkbook from his coat pocket. "Would a deposit be acceptable? Half now, half upon completion?" 20 minutes after he arrived, David Pearson left her apartment, having written a check that temporarily solved her most pressing problem. The transaction still felt surreal as she stood at the window, watching him hail a cab in the street below. Only after he'd gone did she realize he'd never fully explained his interest in her work, or how he'd found her address. Over the next 2 weeks, Eliza worked with renewed focus, completing the painting David had purchased and starting several new pieces. The financial breathing room his deposit had provided cleared mental space as well. Without the immediate threat of eviction, ideas flowed more freely. She found herself thinking about David often, puzzling over his interest and his background. A Google search had yielded frustratingly little, a LinkedIn profile listing him as an independent art consultant with previous experience at several galleries, none particularly prestigious. No social media presence, no press mentions, nothing to suggest he had the means or motivation to pay what he'd offered for her painting. When she called Marcel to ask about him, her friend seemed equally mystified. "Never heard of him before your show," Marcel admitted. "But the art world is vast, darling. Consultants are like pigeons in this city, everywhere, always looking for crumbs. He doesn't strike me as someone scrambling for crumbs," she replied. "There's something substantial about him. Substantial enough to pay your asking price without haggling, apparently," Marcel said with a chuckle. "Don't question good fortune, Eliza. Just embrace it." She wanted to, but her natural skepticism kept her wondering what David Pearson's real agenda might be. When the painting was complete, she texted the number on his card. He responded immediately, asking if he could come by that evening. She agreed, then spent the afternoon cleaning her apartment and herself, wanting to present a more professional appearance than during his last visit. He arrived exactly on time, bearing another paper bag that turned out to contain 2 slices of cheesecake from a renowned bakery. "I thought we might celebrate the completion," he explained, handing her the bag before turning his attention to the painting. She watched his face as he examined it, noting the slight widening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible intake of breath. His reaction seemed genuine, a collector seeing value in a piece that spoke to him. "It's extraordinary," he said finally. "Better than I anticipated." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate, but pride warmed her chest. "It evolved as I worked on it. The figure seems more decisive now," he observed, less hesitant at the edge. She nodded, pleased that he'd noticed this intentional change. "I realized that standing at a precipice doesn't have to be terrifying. It can be the moment before flight." His gaze shifted from the painting to her face, something like approval in his expression. "Exactly." He removed an envelope from his inner pocket. "The balance as agreed." The transaction completed, they sat at her small table eating cheesecake, the painting propped against the wall facing them. The silence between them felt comfortable now, lacking the tension of their previous encounter. "May I ask you something, David?" "Of course. Why me?" "There are countless struggling artists in New York with more established reputations." He considered the question, taking a small bite of cheesecake before answering. "Because most of them would have said yes to modifying their work for a corporate client. And that matters to you? My stubbornness?" "I prefer to call it integrity," he set his fork down. "It's rare, especially when tested by genuine hardship. Many artists claim they won't compromise their vision, but few maintain that stance when facing eviction." Eliza flinched slightly. "How did you—" "The timing of your acceptance of my offer, plus the relief in your eyes when I wrote the check." His expression softened. "I didn't mean to pry. I've just seen the pattern before." She should have felt exposed, even humiliated, but instead found herself appreciating his directness. "So this was some kind of test?" "Not at all. I genuinely wanted the painting." He paused. "But I am interested in seeing what you create next, now that financial pressure isn't quite so immediate." "I'm not sure it works that way," she said with a wry smile. "One sale doesn't exactly solve everything." "No," he agreed. "But it might be a start." After he left, carefully carrying the wrapped painting, Eliza found herself standing at her window again, watching as he placed it in the trunk of a modest sedan parked across the street. Not a cab this time, but not the luxury vehicle she might have expected from someone willing to pay what he had. The man remained an enigma, but for the first time in years, she felt something unexpected stirring beneath her persistent anxiety, a cautious hope that perhaps her unwillingness to compromise wasn't a character flaw, but a strength someone finally valued. 3 weeks passed without word from David Pearson. Eliza's initial euphoria from the sale faded as reality reasserted itself. The money had solved her immediate housing crisis, but other bills continued to accumulate. Her sister's calls became more frequent as the holidays approached, each one carrying the implicit question of when Eliza would finally accept that her artistic ambitions were unsustainable. "Mom wants you to come for Christmas. Catherine said during their latest conversation. "She's worried about you spending it alone again." "I might have plans." Eliza hedged, though she had none. "With who? Marcel?" "That's just sad, Eliza. He's your gallerist, not your family." The criticism stung because it contained a kernel of truth. Marcel had become one of her few friends in recent years as her social circle contracted alongside her finances. Most of her college friends had moved on to marriages, mortgages, and careers with health insurance, lives that seemed increasingly foreign to her. "I'll think about it," she promised, ending the call before Catherine could press further. Outside, December had transformed the city into a glittering display of holiday excess. Shop windows featured elaborate scenes, and even her rundown neighborhood had strung lights across the main thoroughfare. The contrast between the external celebration and her internal state of quiet desperation felt particularly acute. She painted through it all, channeling her emotional turbulence into a new series that surprised even her with its intensity. The work was different, more figurative than before, but with the same emotional rawness that had always characterized her style. Each canvas featured individuals at moments of decision or transformation, surrounded by abstract elements that represented their inner psychological landscapes. It was the best work she'd ever done, and she had no idea if anyone would want it. The text from David came unexpectedly one evening as she was cleaning brushes. "New exhibition at Thorn Gallery tomorrow night. Would value your perspective. May I pick you up at 7? She stared at the message, pulse quickening. The Thorn Gallery was not just any venue. It was one of the most prestigious contemporary art spaces in the city, known for launching careers and commanding impressive prices. "You want me to attend with you?" she texted back, uncertain of his intention. "Yes. The artist's approach reminded me of some elements in your work. Thought you might find it interesting." She hesitated, then typed, "I'd like that. See you at 7. Setting down her phone, Eliza surveyed her closet with sudden concern. Her wardrobe consisted primarily of paint-spattered work clothes and a few simple dresses for gallery openings. Nothing appropriate for Thorn, where the attendees would be wearing designer labels and precious jewelry. After an hour of increasingly frustrated attempts to assemble a suitable outfit, she gave up and called the one person who might help without judgment. "Marcel? I need a favor." The following evening, Eliza waited nervously in front of her building, wearing a sleek black jumpsuit borrowed from Marcel's sister and a vintage silver necklace that had been her grandmother's. She'd spent an uncharacteristic amount of time on her appearance, styling her usually untamed auburn hair into something approaching elegance and applying makeup with careful precision. When David's car pulled up precisely at 7, she was startled to see him emerge from the back seat rather than the driver's side. A uniformed chauffeur held the door as she approached. "You hired a car service?" she asked, confusion evident in her tone. "Good evening, Eliza," David replied, seemingly unperturbed by her question. "You look lovely." "Thank you. But seriously, a chauffeur?" He smiled slightly. "The Thorn is in Midtown. Parking would be a nightmare." This seemed more practical. She accepted this explanation and slid into the back seat, noting that while the vehicle was clean and comfortable, it wasn't the luxury limousine one might expect for a trip to one of the city's most exclusive galleries. Like everything about David Pearson, it occupied some middle ground, neither ostentatious nor ordinary. As they traveled across the city, David asked about her recent work with what seemed like genuine interest. She found herself describing her new series in detail, animated by his thoughtful questions and observations. "So you're moving toward more representational elements while maintaining the emotional abstraction that defines your style," he summarized. "Yes, exactly," she said, pleased by his understanding. "I'm trying to create a visual language that bridges the gap between what can be easily seen and what can only be felt." He nodded, something like satisfaction in his expression. "That's precisely what I hoped would happen." The comment struck her as odd. "What you hoped would happen? With my work?" "Artists evolve when given space to breathe," he said simply. "Financial pressure can be creatively constrictive." Before she could pursue this curious statement, the car stopped in front of the Thorn Gallery, its modernist facade illuminated dramatically against the winter night. A small crowd of well-dressed people waited to enter, many clearly recognizable as art world luminaries even to Eliza's untrained eye. Panic fluttered in her chest. "I don't belong here," she whispered, suddenly frozen in the car seat. David turned to her, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Yes, you do. Your work belongs in spaces like this. Consider tonight research for your future." His confidence steadied her. She took a deep breath and exited the car when the chauffeur opened her door, straightening her shoulders as she joined David on the sidewalk. Inside, the gallery hummed with the particular energy of a successful opening, glasses clinking, conversations overlapping, the subtle dance of people moving between artworks and each other. The exhibition featured large-scale paintings that combined traditional techniques with contemporary subject matter, not unlike what Eliza was currently exploring, though executed with a technical precision she still aspired to. "What do you think?" David asked as they stood before a massive canvas, depicting a solitary figure surrounded by symbolic objects rendered in hyper-realistic detail. "It's technically impressive," she admitted, "but there's something almost too perfect about it." "Too controlled," he nodded, seeming pleased with her assessment. "The artist is classically trained. Sometimes that training becomes a constraint rather than a foundation." As they moved through the exhibition, Eliza noticed something unexpected. People were noticing them, or more specifically noticing David. Several gallery patrons nodded deferentially as they passed, and the gallery director himself approached at one point, greeting David with evident respect. "Mr. Pearson, what an unexpected pleasure. Had I known you were attending, I would have arranged a private viewing." David shook the man's hand with casual warmth. "No need for special arrangements, James. I'm simply introducing a colleague to Jonas's work." The director turned his attention to Eliza, assessing her with new interest. "And you are?" "Eliza Morgan," she said, extending her hand. "Ms. Morgan is an exceptional artist herself," David added, "working in a space that intersects with Jonas's concerns, but with a distinctly different approach." James's expression shifted subtly, not quite dismissive, but clearly placing her in the category of countless aspiring artists David might have championed in the past. "How fascinating. I'd love to see your work sometime." The insincerity was palpable, but David merely smiled. "I think you will, James. Sooner rather than later." As they continued through the gallery, Eliza's confusion mounted. Who exactly was David Pearson that the director of the Thorn would offer him a private viewing? And why was he suggesting that the same director would see her work sooner rather than later? The questions built until, standing before a particularly striking piece in a quieter corner of the gallery, she finally turned to him. "David, what's really going on here? Who are you?" He considered her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I told you I'm an art consultant." "An art consultant who commands enough respect for the director of the Thorn to practically bow when you enter? An art consultant who can afford chauffeurs and paying asking price for unknown artists?" A faint smile crossed his face. "Perhaps a more established consultant than I initially implied." "I think it's more than that." She held his gaze steadily. "I think there's something you're not telling me." He glanced around the gallery, then checked his watch. "You're right. But this isn't the place to discuss it." He nodded toward the exit. "Shall we?" Outside, the chauffeur was waiting. As they settled into the back seat, Eliza expected David to direct the driver back to her apartment. Instead, he provided an address she didn't recognize in the Upper East Side. "Where are we going?" she asked, a flutter of unease mixing with curiosity. "My home," he replied simply. "I think it's time I showed you something that might answer your questions." The city transformed around them as they traveled, Brooklyn's eclectic streets giving way to Manhattan's grid, then to the rarefied atmosphere of the Upper East Side, where historic buildings housed some of the wealthiest residents in the world. The car finally stopped before an elegant townhouse, its limestone facade subtle yet unmistakably expensive. "This is yours?" Eliza asked, unable to keep the disbelief from her voice as they climbed the steps to the front door. "For the past 15 years, David confirmed, unlocking the door and gesturing for her to enter. The interior was both more and less than she had expected. The architecture was impeccable. Soaring ceilings, original moldings, a graceful staircase ascending to upper floors. But instead of the conventional luxury she might have anticipated, the space was dominated by art. Museum-quality pieces hung with perfect lighting on every wall, small sculptures positioned on minimalist pedestals, creating a flow that guided the eye from one work to another. "My God," she breathed, recognizing pieces by artists whose names were whispered reverently in art schools. "This is a private collection?" "Mine, yes." David watched her reactions closely as she moved through the foyer into a large living room where more art awaited. "I've been collecting for about 30 years. She turned to him, the pieces finally clicking together. "You're not just a consultant. You're a major collector." "Among other things," he acknowledged. I do consult for certain clients, but primarily I collect works that speak to me personally. Why the pretense? A hint of anger colored her question. Why present yourself as just some middle-tier art advisor? He moved to a sideboard, pouring 2 glasses of water before answering. Because when artists learn they're in the presence of a collector with significant resources, their behavior changes. Suddenly they're performing, trying to impress or sell, rather than simply being authentic about their work. He handed her a glass, which she accepted automatically, her mind racing to reconcile this new information with her previous understanding of him. So the corporate client was a test, as you suspected. He gestured for her to sit on one of the elegant chairs positioned to view the art, rather than a television or fireplace. I needed to know if your principles were genuine or merely posturing. She remained standing, indignation rising. You manipulated me. I gave you an opportunity to demonstrate your character, he corrected gently. And you did, impressively. But why me? With all this, she gestured around the art-filled room. Why would you bother with an unknown artist from Brooklyn who can barely pay rent? David was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she refused to. Because 30 years ago, I was that artist. Talented but struggling, unwilling to compromise, facing eviction and failure. The revelation stunned her. Nothing about his polished demeanor suggested he had ever lived as she did, on the edge of financial disaster. What happened? She asked, finally taking the seat he'd offered. I was fortunate. Someone saw value in my work when the market didn't. A collector named Eleanor Thorne. Thorne, as in the gallery we just visited? He nodded. Eleanor's family founded it. She was a remarkable woman who believed in supporting artists through difficult transitions, allowing them to develop without commercial pressure. And she supported you? She bought 3 pieces when I couldn't pay my rent. Paid significantly above what any reasonable valuation would have suggested they were worth. A smile touched his lips, warm with memory. I was as suspicious as you are now. Convinced it was charity or manipulation or some agenda I couldn't see? The parallel was unmistakable. Eliza set down her water glass. And now you're doing the same for me, in a sense. Eleanor called it investing in the future of art. She did it for dozens of artists over her lifetime. Most never became commercially successful, but all of them created work that mattered, work that was true to their vision because they weren't forced to compromise it to survive. And the ones who did become successful? Some are hanging on these walls, he said simply. Eleanor's faith was justified many times over, both artistically and financially. Eliza fell silent, grappling with the implications. What had felt like manipulation now seemed like something else entirely. A kind of artistic patronage she had assumed no longer existed in the contemporary market-driven art world. When Eleanor died 10 years ago, David continued, she left me not only her collection but also her mission, to identify artists of integrity and ensure they have the space to create without compromise. And you think I'm one of those artists? I know you are. He leaned forward slightly. Your work has something essential that can't be taught or manufactured, an authentic voice. What it lacks is time to develop, to refine, to reach its full potential. And you want to give me that time, she said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. I want to offer you a proposition, he corrected. Not charity, but a business arrangement. I'll purchase a significant body of your work, enough to give you financial stability for 2 years. During that time, you create without commercial constraints. At the end, we'll evaluate where you stand. Eliza's mind raced, calculating what such an arrangement might mean. Freedom from financial pressure, space to experiment, the luxury of failure without catastrophic consequences. But her inherent wariness remained. Why the elaborate approach? The pretense of being just a consultant? Why not simply introduce yourself honestly? Because patronage creates its own constraints, he said candidly. I needed to know who you are when you believe no one important is watching. What choices you make when there's no apparent benefit to making them. The logic was both disturbing and strangely compelling. She had revealed herself authentically to him, believing he was just another art world figure of modest influence. And if I say no? She asked, testing the boundaries of this proposition. Then I'll drive you home tonight and we'll go our separate ways. No harm done? His expression was serene, without pressure or expectation. This only works if you want it, Eliza. Obligation produces mediocre art. She stood abruptly, needing movement to process this revelation. Walking to the nearest wall, she studied a small, emotionally charged painting she recognized as an early work by an artist, now featured in major museums worldwide. May I think about it? she asked finally, turning back to face him. "This is a lot to process." "Of course." He rose as well. "Take whatever time you need. The offer has no expiration date." As he called for the car to take her home, Eliza found herself standing before a striking abstract painting that seemed somehow familiar, despite knowing she'd never seen it before. "This one resonates with you," David observed, joining her. "There's something about the composition. It feels like controlled chaos, but with this underlying structure holding everything together." She leaned closer. "The signature, is that yours?" He nodded, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his usually composed features. "From 1989, one of the pieces Eleanor purchased." Eliza studied it with new understanding. "You were good, really good." "I was finding my voice," he said quietly. "But life took me in a different direction." "Do you regret it? Not continuing as an artist?" He considered the question carefully. "Sometimes. But I discovered I had a different gift, recognizing authentic vision in others and helping it flourish. Eleanor helped me find that path." The chauffeur arrived and David walked her to the door. As they stood on the threshold of his impressive home, Eliza found herself asking the question that had been forming since his revelation. All this, the collection, the townhouse, the apparent influence at galleries like the Thorn, it suggests you're not just a successful former artist turned collector. A smile flickered at the corners of his mouth, perceptive as always. "So who are you really, David Pearson?" He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "My family name is actually Pearson Whitley. The Whitley Gallery Foundation was established by my grandfather in 1945. The name hit her like a physical force. The Whitley Foundation was legendary, one of the most significant private arts foundations in the country, responsible for major acquisitions at museums nationwide, and named among ART News' top 10 most influential art world powers. You're a Whitley," she whispered, the full magnitude of their interactions suddenly shifting into new perspective. "I'm David," he corrected gently. "A person who believes in your work. The rest is just context." As the car carried her back to Brooklyn, Eliza's mind whirled with possibilities and doubts. By the time she reached her shabby apartment building, the contrast between David's world and hers couldn't have been more stark. Yet somehow, against all logic, he had seen something in her work that transcended that gap, something worth investing in and protecting. She climbed the stairs to her apartment slowly, every step a movement toward a decision that could change everything. 2 days later, Eliza stood in her studio, surrounded by her work, every canvas she'd completed in the past 3 years, arranged in chronological order. She'd spent hours studying them, looking for what David Pearson Whitley, might have seen that others had missed. Her phone sat on the paint-spattered table, his contact information displayed on the screen. She had typed and deleted multiple messages, unable to find words that adequately expressed her tumultuous thoughts. A knock at her door broke her concentration. Expecting the building superintendent or perhaps a package delivery, she was stunned to find Catherine standing in the hallway, holding a small overnight bag. "Surprise," her sister said with an awkward smile. "I thought we could have sister time before the holiday craziness." "Catherine, this isn't a great moment," Eliza began, but her sister was already brushing past her into the apartment. "Oh my," Catherine said, taking in the unusual arrangement of paintings. "Are you doing inventory?" "Something like that," Eliza muttered, closing the door. "Why are you really here, Kath?" Her sister's smile faltered. "Mom's worried." "I'm worried. You haven't been returning calls, and after that panicked conversation about eviction last month." "I'm fine," Eliza insisted. The eviction situation was resolved. Catherine's eyebrows rose. "How? Did you finally sell something significant?" "Yes, actually." Eliza gestured to an empty space on the wall where David's purchased painting had hung. "And potentially more." "That's unexpected good news." Catherine set down her bag, studying her sister more carefully. "You seem different. Less desperate." "Thanks for the compliment," Eliza said dryly. "You know what I mean." Catherine moved around the room, examining the displayed paintings with more attention than she'd shown Eliza's work in years. "These are different too. More, I don't know, confident?" Despite her annoyance at the interruption, Eliza felt a flicker of pleasure at her sister's observation. "I've been experimenting with a new approach." Catherine stopped before the most recent canvas, a large piece depicting a woman stepping from darkness into vivid light, her face turned away but her body language suggesting both fear and resolve. "This is beautiful, Liz." she said softly, using the childhood nickname she rarely employed anymore. It feels like you. The simple, genuine response touched something in Eliza, momentarily dissolving the defensive wall she'd built between her artistic life and her family. Thanks, Kath. Her sister turned, expression serious. Who bought your work? A new gallery? A private collector. Eliza hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. Someone connected to the Whitley Foundation. Catherine's eyes widened comically. The Whitley? As in the people who donate millions to MoMA and the Met? How did you manage that? He saw my work at Marcel's gallery. The simplified explanation felt both true and incomplete, like a sketch missing crucial details. Well, that's amazing. Catherine's tone shifted from skepticism to something like awe. Does this mean you might actually make this work? The whole struggling artist thing? The question, so similar to ones Catherine had asked countless times before, suddenly struck Eliza differently. Rather than hearing judgment, she recognized genuine concern behind the words. Her sister had worried not because she didn't believe in Eliza's talent, but because she couldn't bear watching her suffer for it. I don't know, Eliza answered honestly, but I've been offered a chance to find out without the struggling part. Over cups of tea, she explained David's proposition in general terms, watching her sister's expression shift from disbelief to cautious excitement. It sounds too good to be true, Catherine said finally. Like something from a movie, not real life. That's what I've been thinking. Eliza cradled her mug, searching for words. I keep waiting for the catch, the hidden agenda. And if there isn't one, if it's exactly what he says, a business investment in your future work, then I'd be an idiot to refuse. Catherine set down her cup, meeting Eliza's eyes directly. So what's really holding you back? The question pierced Eliza's carefully constructed rationalizations. What was holding her back? Not suspicion. She'd researched David thoroughly after learning his full identity and confirmed everything he'd told her. The Whitley Foundation did indeed have a history of supporting emerging artists, and Eleanor Thorne had been a legendary patron before her death. I think, she said slowly, I'm afraid of what it means to accept, to admit I need help, to let someone else have a stake in my creative life. Catherine's expression softened with understanding. You've always been pathologically independent, Liz. Even as a kid, you'd rather fail on your own than succeed with help. That's not true, Eliza protested automatically, then paused. Is it? Remember your senior art project? Ms. Daniels offered extra studio time, special materials, everything. You refused because you wanted to do it your way, even though your way meant staying up 3 nights straight and having a breakdown before the exhibition. The memory stung with its accuracy. That was different. Was it? Catherine reached across the table to touch her sister's hand. There's no medal for unnecessary suffering, Eliza. Taking help doesn't diminish your talent or your vision. The words resonated more deeply than Eliza expected, touching a truth she'd been circling for days. Her refusal to compromise had been a point of pride, but perhaps she'd been conflating artistic integrity with a stubborn insistence on doing everything alone. After Catherine left for her hotel, promising to return the next day, Eliza stood again before her arranged paintings. In the progression from earliest to latest works, she could see what David had recognized, not just technical improvement, but an emerging clarity of vision, a consistent thread of authenticity running through even her least successful pieces. With sudden clarity, she picked up her phone and typed a simple message. Yes, I accept your offer. David's response came within minutes. I'm glad. When can we discuss details? As she suggested a meeting time, a weight lifted. Not the familiar temporary relief of a crisis narrowly averted, but something deeper. For the first time in years, she could see beyond the next rent payment, the next meal, the next desperate attempt to stay afloat while creating work that mattered. Possibilities stretched before her like an empty canvas, waiting. 6 months later, the Adler Gallery in Chelsea hummed with the particular energy of a successful opening night. Champagne flowed, conversations buzzed, and most importantly, small red dots appeared beside paintings as sales were confirmed. Eliza stood in a quiet corner, watching as people moved between her works, 15 pieces created during her first 6 months under David's patronage. The exhibition, titled Thresholds, represented her emergence from artistic hibernation into a new phase of creative confidence. Congratulations, Marcel said, appearing beside her with 2 champagne flutes. 5 sold already, and we're only an hour in. I'd say your days of struggling are officially over. She accepted the glass with a smile. Thanks to you. You kept showing my work when no one was buying. I always knew they would eventually." He clinked his glass against hers. "Though I admit, I never expected the Whitley Foundation to come calling. How did you manage that connection?" "Long story," she said, her gaze drifting to where David stood across the room, engaged in conversation with the gallery owner. As if sensing her attention, he glanced up, offering a subtle nod of approval. In the months since accepting his proposition, their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated, not quite friendship, but a deep mutual respect that transcended the traditional patron-artist dynamic. He had been true to his word, providing financial support without creative interference, offering observations only when asked. The arrangement had freed her not just financially, but psychologically. Without the pressure to sell, she had paradoxically created work that was more commercially viable, authentic but accessible, challenging but engaging. "Your sister seems to be enjoying herself," Marcel observed, nodding toward Catherine, who was enthusiastically describing one of Eliza's paintings to a bemused couple. "She's appointed herself my unofficial publicist," Eliza said with affectionate exasperation. "Told Mom she always knew I'd make it." Marcel laughed. "Family. They never quite get how hard the journey was, do they?" "No," she agreed. "But maybe that's okay. The struggle was real, but it wasn't the point." As the evening progressed, Eliza circulated through the crowd, explaining her work to interested patrons with a confidence that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. By closing time, 11 of her 15 pieces had sold, a triumph by any standard. After the last guests departed, she found herself alone with David in the gallery, surrounded by the 4 unsold paintings. "Happy?" he asked simply. She considered the question. "Yes, but not because of the sales. Because for the first time I feel like the work I created is truly what I intended. No compromises, no shortcuts forced by circumstance." He nodded, understanding. "That's the real success? Though the sales don't hurt," she added with a smile. 9 were to people who have no connection to you. That means something. "It means your work stands on its own merit," he agreed, "as I always knew it would." They walked together through the gallery, viewing each remaining piece in the peaceful quiet that followed the opening's energy. "I never thanked you properly," Eliza said finally, stopping before the painting that had started it all, the woman at the precipice, now positioned as the exhibition's centerpiece. "Not just for the financial support, but for seeing something in my work when no one else did. I simply recognized what was already there," David replied. "The same way Eleanor did for me, and countless others before and since. It's a continuum, not charity. Still, you changed everything. I was ready to give up." He turned to face her fully. "No, you weren't. That's precisely why I approached you. Even facing eviction, you refused to compromise your vision. That kind of integrity is rare and worth protecting." The truth of his words settled between them, comfortable in its simplicity. What had initially seemed like manipulation had been recognition. What felt like charity was actually investment in her work, in her future, in the continuum of authentic artistic expression he had described. "What happens now?" she asked. "Our arrangement was for 2 years, but with tonight's success, nothing changes," he said firmly. "Commercial validation is wonderful, but it's also fickle. The goal was to give you time and space to develop fully, regardless of market response." That goal remains. Relief washed through her. Despite the night's success, she knew how precarious an artistic career could be. One successful show didn't guarantee sustainable income or continued critical interest. "I won't waste the opportunity," she promised. "I know you won't." His smile held genuine warmth. "You're already proving Eleanor's philosophy correct. Art that comes from authentic vision, uncompromised by commercial pressure, eventually finds its audience." As they left the gallery together, stepping into the cool spring evening, Eliza glanced back at the exhibition space where her work hung, validated not just by sales, but by the integrity with which it had been created. A struggling artist refuses to sell out, never realizing the buyer was secretly a billionaire patron. The thought brought a smile to her face now rather than anxiety. What had seemed like a hardship had become an unexpected gift. The rare opportunity to create without compromise, supported by someone who understood the true value of artistic integrity. "Ready?" David asked, holding open the car door. Eliza took one last look at the gallery. "Ready," she confirmed, stepping forward into her future, a future where authenticity and success no longer seemed mutually exclusive, where her refusal to compromise had led not to failure, but to previously unimagined possibilities. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying them through the glittering city streets, past the endless thresholds waiting to be crossed by those brave enough to remain true to their vision, regardless of the cost.